Christopher, thank you for joining us. We are coming to you live from the Kannico agency, and this is our special new series called Ask the Expert. And today we have a very special expert with us. So my name is Kirsten Stevens, and we have with us today Dr. Christopher Noe of CNoeLimits, and he is going to help guide us a little bit on some questions about strategy and strategic planning for 2020. And I know we're all in this mode of looking ahead and planning for the next decade. So we're going to tap into his expertise and see what he has to share with us. So Dr. Christopher Noe, do you want to say a few words about yourself and your background?
So my background is varied. I have all three sectors. I've been the managing director of the Office Depot Foundation, worked at a Fortune Global 200 company, helping lots of charities nationally and internationally, which was amazing. Before that, I used to work in government and worked in D.C. and Capitol Hill and quickly got out of the politics. And then I became the state director, the youngest state director of Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the nation. And I was the director of MAD of Georgia for over 4 years. And so that's when I first was introduced to the nonprofit sector and fell in love with the social sector and been involved in some form since as a consultant or as staff within the nonprofit sector for the last 15 years.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing all that with us. To remind everybody where you've been. It's been a long track record there.
Yes, quite a journey.
I know. All right, so let's jump right in. So we want to talk a little bit about strategic planning. I think if you could tell us, Christopher, because this is brief, so we really just want sort of a couple of things that people are going to remember.
Yep.
But if we think about what are the top things that we need to be thinking about as we put together our strategic plan or as we look towards a strategic planning session, what are the main things that bubble up for you that you think, gosh, people really need to think about this?
So this is where I really get light up and get excited. Strategic planning, I'm a strategist at heart and I love everything about it. Having started out and running political campaigns, you know it's about the message, and at that point it was the candidate. When it comes to the nonprofits and how you consider strategic thinking, really, and even in the literature, it's changing from strategic planning to what we call strategic positioning. It's about a rapidly changing world and how are you adapting to those changes, and we call that adaptive capacity. And so there's a lot of new things emerging that we're speaking to now because a plan isn't just static. You can have a 3-year or 5-year plan, but you need to adapt. If there's changes within the employee or the workforce, if there's changes to the sector, to the economy. So there's a lot of existential threats to an organization, but also internal. You know, there's going to be movement with the executive director or boards. As you know, there's a lot of change. So what does strategic thinking mean? But what I start with my clients is asking one simple question. What is the dream? Where do you see this organization going in the next 10 years, 15 years? And I always start with one question. And it's, do you know that the nation of Japan has a 500-year plan for itself? And when people start to think about that, they're like, wow, that's amazing. How do you even get past 50 years, 100 years, cerebrally, to even think, how do we even think it would look like in 500 years? But we're not going to go 500 years. When you think just 10 years, and this is I borrow from Stephen Covey, he says, begin with the end in mind and work backwards. And I love that because that's what we call the postcard destination. What is that destination that you want to take it to? And I think, you know, I quote Simon Sinek because I love this. He said, Martin Luther King Jr. didn't stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 and say, I have a 10-point plan. Right. He said, I have a dream. And I think everyone could buy into that. And that's the vision space. And that's it galvanizes and compels. But then when you tie strategy to it, that's what we call strategy formulation. And that is where you have the Jim Collins, the BHAGs, the Big Hairy Audacious Goals, aligned to the strategy that you want to achieve. And one thing we always say, I used to have a cartoon meme that in my presentations, it says strategy is take the river to get upstream. The tactic, for example, is take a boat to on that river. So there's definitions that you'll need to know when thinking about strategy. What is going to get you to your destination and what tools and resources do you need along that journey?
That's a great little summary, what you just said there. Where are you going and what are you going to need? What are the tools and resources to get there?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, good. All right, so next question. Who's involved in this process? I get asked that a lot. I know you get asked that a lot. And the answers have, even that I hear from other people and out in the community, have been everything from everyone to, well, really it should only be the executive committee of a board, or I've even heard of CEOs of organizations or chairs of board who sit down and write it themselves, all alone, so with no input, which is a little frightening. So give us your thoughts on that.
So this is where you want to get creative, and this is what the Harvard Business Review says. You want to put together a guiding coalition, and I love that terminology because most people just say, we need a committee for that. Using the word committee scares people, even task force sometimes. You think it's task involved. You want people to lean in and engage, and people who are forward-thinking, the people who are the visionaries at the table, and it really also depends on what type of strategy you want to achieve. If you're a nonprofit that says, well, we just want to serve more kids year after year for the next 5 years, that's one picture. If you say, we want to scale to the top 10 cities in the nation over the next 10 years, that's a whole different group of people that need to be at the table. You need more entrepreneurs, more visionaries, thought leaders who can help get you there and help really kind of craft the path to get you to where you want to go. So I say, put together a strategic planning council with the best minds who have the capacity, one, to imagine what the destination can look like and can achieve the vision and the dream, and then those that know how to execute. Because I will say one thing about strategic planning, and this is the big data point that really shocked me and stopped me in my tracks when I heard it. The execution rate of strategic planning success in the field is only 14%. 86% of strategic plans by consultants will sit on a shelf. So if it's not bought in by the culture throughout the organization, then you've done all that work for naught. You paid a consultant a lot of money for naught. So you really want to be able to execute on the plan and have the right team, as Jim Collins says, and the right seats on that bus going toward that destination, and everyone leaning in. And the other thing I will say big about strategic plans real quick is timelines. Because it's one thing if you say 18 months, 24 months, or 5 years, but those timelines hold your feet to the fire in terms of the milestones to achieve, and I think that is where you're going to have the most successful results on execution, using those timelines.
Agreed. It's all about accountability and sticking to those timelines.
Yes.
So question then about the people. You mentioned entrepreneurs, perhaps people in the community and so on. Are these only people that know who you are that should be involved in the strategic planning process? Or could they just be that you've invited maybe a local, I don't know, somebody who sits on the city council of your local community? What would be your input on
I'm going to
that?
give a definition of stakeholder and how I use it.
Excellent.
Stakeholder is
Perfect.
someone who has an aligned interest with the future direction of your organization. And I think that, they can be people who are financial stakeholders who want to support and give, but also those that are strategically aligned and want to be a stakeholder at the table. So it can be board members. It doesn't have to be comprised of just board members. I would want external stakeholders. I would want maybe someone representative of the target population you serve.
Yes.
If you can have someone who's funded you or a donor at the table, that's fine. That's added value. Because they are people who are literally buying into the dream and investing in you in a social investment, expecting a social ROI, return on their investment. So I think you want to have those aligned, like-minded people with common interest that can get to that destination point and are ready to go on that journey together.
I love that. Great. Thank you for explaining that. The stakeholder question, that's important.
Yes.
Those are the people that are going to help get you where you need to go.
And definitions are important.
And definitions are important.
Yes.
What other final thoughts do you have for us, Dr. Christopher Noe, as we
there's so many.
wrap up our first full week of January of 2020?
Yes.
Any other final thoughts on strategic planning for 2020?
One final, and this is something I deal with when I do a lot of board retreats, and this is where I ask a question: how do you self-identify as a leader of this organization? Because that gets to the heart of strategy. And if they don't know who they are, meaning their value proposition and why they exist at their essence, then they can't really formulate what that 10 years and 5 years is in front of them. And a lot of nonprofits, even if they've been around for 5 decades or longer, sometimes lose their way. And I know they call that mission creep, but I'm speaking more to about having clear strategic direction in what we call intentionality and deliberateness, because a lot of nonprofit organizations, one thing I tell them, a big thing about strategy is saying no to things, because you're going to be tempted to go in many different directions, but the more that you can be deliberate with your outcomes, with your impact data, with the target population you're serving, then the more success, and sometimes it's concentrated success. It's not always about serving more, because that is some circle that the need is always going to exist. The need may even be growing, but it's about the quality of impact that you're able to do with the resources that you have at the table. and then making that case for others to then join in that journey with you.
And sometimes that means leaving things off the table, right? And saying no.
By design. And we
Which,
call
by
that
the way,
design thinking.
We all need to learn to do that, because I think we all take on too much and say yes too much. So that
Guilty.
should be, guilty as well. I think in 2020 that should be something we should learn to do, is say no a little more often and be a little more selective and intentional about where we're putting our energy.
And if I can say one more thing about 2020, this is not only the start of a new year, it's the start of a new decade. So start thinking that maybe this is a reset moment that your organization can have, asking the big, bold questions. Who are we today? Where are we going in 10 years from now? And then what does that destination path look like? And then how do we do it with deliberate intentionality?
I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Christopher.
Thank you.
Good to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And we thank you so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. Also, think about joining our nonprofit community forum hosted by the Kannico Agency, which is now live. We answer your questions, we ask questions, and it's just a lot of engagement and interaction. So thank you so much for being here with us live today.